Kurds, or the Kurdish people, are an Iranic ethnic group from West Asia. They are indigenous to Kurdistan, a geographic region spanning southeastern Turkey, northwestern Iran, northern Iraq, and northeastern Syria. Kurdistan is defined as a geographic region rather than a sovereign state, and the Kurds are recognized as one of the largest ethnic groups in the world without their own country. The global Kurdish population is estimated to be between 30 and 45 million people. While most Kurds live within Kurdistan, significant communities also exist beyond this region, including Central Anatolian Kurds and Kurdish populations in Istanbul, Khorasani Kurds in Iran, and Caucasian Kurds primarily in Azerbaijan and Armenia. In addition, Kurdish diaspora communities are found in several European countries, most notably Germany, France, Sweden, and the Netherlands. The prospect of Kurdish independence, rooted in early Kurdish nationalism, has been a source of ethnic and political tension in West Asia since the 19th century. This tension is closely linked to the distribution of Kurdish populations across several states. In this video, we will show the origin of the name Kurd, the Kurdish language, theories of origin and genetic research, Kurdish history from Antiquity and the medieval period, developments under Safavid and Ottoman rule, the emergence of Kurdish nationalism, the impact of the First and Second World Wars, the period after World War II, and current population data. This channel has created over 200 history-focused videos. Help us keep growing by subscribing, hitting the like button, leaving a comment, and checking out our other content on the channel. The exact origins of the name Kurd are unclear. The underlying toponym appears in ancient sources, recorded in Assyrian as Kardu and in Middle Bronze Age Sumerian as Karda. In Assyrian usage, Kardu referred to a region in the Upper Tigris Basin, and this name is generally considered to survive in a corrupted form in Classical Arabic as Dudi, later readopted into Kurdish as Kudi. The name also appears as the first element in the toponym Korduin, which was mentioned by Xenophon in the 4th century BCE when describing the tribe that opposed the retreat of the 10,000 through the mountainous areas north of Mesopotamia. There are, however, alternative views that reject a derivation from Kardu and Korduin. Some scholars instead propose a connection with the Sirti or Sirtai, a group attested in classical sources. These interpretations challenge the idea that the name Kurd is directly linked to the Assyrian and Sumerian toponyms associated with the Upper Tigris region. Regardless of its possible roots in ancient place names, the ethnonym Kurd may also derive from the Middle Persian term Kurt, which was used as a common noun meaning nomad or tent dweller. In this sense, the term could originally have been applied broadly to Iranic groups with a nomadic lifestyle, rather than referring to a specific ethnic group. Over time, this descriptive term gradually took on a more defined meaning. Following the Muslim conquest of Persia, the term Kurd entered Arabic usage and increasingly became associated with a diverse collection of Iranic and Iranicized tribes and groups living in the region. During this period, the word developed the characteristics of an ethnonym, shifting from a social or occupational label toward a designation tied to a particular population. A different interpretation was presented by the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland in 1923. The journal claimed that, just as the Persian name Kerman corresponded to Karman in Syriac, the Persian word Kurd corresponded to Kardu in Syriac. It further suggested that the Persian terms Gurd or Kurd, derived from a common origin with the Babylonian Gardu or Kardu, carried meanings such as brave, valiant, or warlike, and that these traits were seen as characteristic of the Kurds. According to this view, the term passed from Persian into Arabic and from there into European usage as the common name for the Kurdish people. Kurdish, referred to in Kurdish as Kurdi, is a collection of related dialects spoken by the Kurdish people. It is mainly spoken in the regions of Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey that together form Kurdistan. Kurdish holds official status in Iraq as a national language alongside Arabic, is recognized in Iran as a regional language, and is acknowledged in Armenia as a minority language. Arab geographers such as al-Masudi already recognized the Kurds as a people with a distinct language as early as the 10th century. Many Kurds are bilingual or multilingual. Alongside their native Kurdish, they often speak the dominant language of the state in which they live, such as Arabic, Persian, or Turkish. Kurds living in diaspora communities frequently speak 3 or more languages. At the same time, Turkified and Arabized Kurds may speak little or no Kurdish, reflecting long-term processes of linguistic assimilation. Despite being grouped under a single name, Kurdish dialects share relatively few linguistic features that are unique to Kurdish and not also found in other Iranian languages. According to Mackenzie, this lack of universally shared features makes Kurdish classification complex. On this basis, Kurdish dialects are commonly divided into 3 main groups. The northern group, represented by the Kermanji dialects, the central group, associated with Sorani, and the southern group, which includes the Kswaran dialect group and Laki. Zaza and Gorani speakers are ethnically Kurdish, but the Zaza-Gorani languages themselves are not classified as Kurdish. This distinction highlights the linguistic diversity within the Kurdish population and the difference between ethnic identity and linguistic classification. The Kurds are a people of heterogeneous origins. Some scholars have argued that they descend from Indo-European tribes that migrated into the region around 2000 BCE, while Kurdish ethnicity itself likely developed through a long process of interaction between these incoming groups and local populations. Among the possible local ancestors mentioned in scholarship are the Lulubi and the Guti, whose descendants may have contributed to the formation of early Kurdish communities. The precise origin of the Kurds remains uncertain, largely because they are divided among several modern states and are often excluded from official national histories. State-centered historical narratives have tended to marginalize Kurdish history, and even within modern European scholarship, Kurds have been poorly represented. Many historical accounts rely on non-Kurdish sources, which are often difficult to access or interpret, resulting in conflicting theories and ongoing controversy. These limitations make it especially difficult to trace Kurdish origins in early history, particularly for the period before the Arab Islamic conquests. Linguists have proposed several, often conflicting, theories regarding the geographic origins of the Kurds. One prominent approach is the Northwest Iranian origin theory, which identifies the Kurds as descendants of ancient Iranian-speaking groups such as the Medes, based on assumed linguistic similarities. However, this theory remains weakly supported, as only a small number of authentic Median words are known, far too few to sustain broad conclusions about direct descent. Another proposal is the Northeast Iranian origin theory, first articulated in the early 20th century, which suggests that the Kurds migrated from the east and later shifted westward into Media. A third hypothesis, the Southwest Iranian origin theory, is based on perceived linguistic similarities among Persian Balochi and Kurdish during the Middle Iranian period, roughly from the 4th century BCE to the 9th century CE. Proponents of this view argue that these similarities imply a closely related ethnic origin located in the southwest of what is now Iran. These origin theories are largely rooted in linguistic analysis and were primarily developed by linguists. In contrast to these views, a 2012 DNA-based study in human anthropology argued that the earliest traceable ancestors of the Kurds were descendants of indigenous Neolithic populations of the northern Fertile Crescent. According to this research, these populations were located mainly outside and northwest of present-day Iran, across the Near East and parts of Eurasia. The study further suggested that these indigenous groups were later linguistically Iranianized over several millennia through multiple waves of militarily organized elites associated with the R1A1 haplogroup migrating from Central Asia. As a result, the study concluded that the Neolithic Aboriginal populations and the later Iranian-speaking elites represented distinct ancestral layers rather than a single original population. More recent genetic research conducted after 2012 has provided more detailed and nuanced data on Kurdish origins. A 2021 maternal lineage study of Kurds in Sulaymaniyah, based on mitochondrial DNA, found that Kurdish maternal haplogroups are common among ancient West Eurasian populations and are often associated with early European-related and Near Eastern groups. These findings point toward deep local ancestry rather than a recent large-scale migration from Central Asia. Further evidence comes from a 2022 Y chromosome study of Sorani Kurds from northeastern Iraq, which identified a predominance of the paternal haplogroup J2, accounting for roughly 28% of the sample. This haplogroup is frequently associated with ancient West Asian farming communities. The study showed that Kurdish paternal lineages cluster more closely with populations from Western and Central Asia than with European or African groups. Additional research published in 2022 and 2023 reinforced these findings. A 2022 HLA genetic study of Kurds in Iran found no strong genetic signal of large-scale Aryan invasions from Central Asia and instead showed genetic patterns shared with Mediterranean, Anatolian, and Caucasus populations. A 2023 DNA sequencing study based on samples from Greater Kurdistan reported a high degree of genetic similarity among Kurdish individuals, suggesting a shared regional ancestry. Taken together, these peer-reviewed studies support the view that the Kurdish people have long-standing indigenous roots in the ancient Near East and the Fertile Crescent, with genetic continuity from early West Asian populations rather than primary descent from later Central Asian Indo-European migrants. One of the earliest references connected to the Kurds appears in ancient Mesopotamian sources. A Sumerian clay tablet dated to the end of the 3rd millennium BCE mentions a land called Kardaka. This territory was located near the people of Su, which some scholars place south of Lake Van. About 1,000 years later, Assyrian inscriptions from the reign of King Tiglath-Pileser I refer to a people called the Korti, whom some researchers have linked to Kardaka. These groups were located west of Lake Van, suggesting continuity in the naming of populations inhabiting this mountainous region. In the late 5th century BCE, Xenophon mentioned a people known as the Kardukoi, who lived east of the Botan River. These people resisted the retreat of the 10,000 as they passed through the mountains north of Mesopotamia. The name Kardukoi later appeared in various forms, such as Kardu and Korduan, associated with areas near Mount Judi on the left bank of the Tigris River. Early 20th century scholars widely accepted a connection between the Kurds and the Kardukoi based on similarities in name and territory, although this identification was later challenged by some scholars on philological grounds. As a result, alternative identifications, such as linking the Kurds to the Sirtians of Media and Persia, were proposed, and the direct connection between Kurd and Kardu, or Kardukoi, has since been rejected by many researchers. Many Kurds traditionally consider themselves descendants of the Medes, an ancient Iranian people. This belief is reflected in the Kurdish national anthem, which refers to the Kurds as the children of the Medes and of Cyaxares. Both Kurdish and the Median language are classified as northwestern Iranian languages, although very little is known about Median itself. Despite this linguistic classification, the current scholarly consensus holds that there is no clearly attested, pre-modern ancestor language from which Kurdish can be directly derived. The term Kurd first appears in Arabic sources in the 7th century. Early Islamic-era texts, including works containing legendary material, such as the Shahnameh and Middle Persian writings like Karnamagi Ardashir-e Pabagan, provide early attestations of the name. These sources also reflect the ethnically diverse origins of the Kurds, indicating that the term did not initially refer to a single, uniform ethnic group. During the Sassanid period, the Karnameh Ardashir-i Pabagan depicts Ardashir first fighting against the Kurds and their leader, Madig. Although Ardashir initially suffered defeat, he eventually succeeded in subjugating them. At this time, the term Kurd was likely used as a social designation for nomadic groups in northwestern Iran rather than as a precise ethnic label. A similar usage appears in accounts from the 4th century CE. In 360 CE, the Sassanid king Shapur II invaded the Roman province of Zabdicene to capture its main city, Bezabde, present-day Cizre. The city was heavily fortified and defended by Roman legions supported by large numbers of Kurdish archers. After a prolonged siege, Shapur II captured the city, massacred its defenders, and later rebuilt and garrisoned it with his own troops. Other groups mentioned in Sassanid sources include the Qadishai, who were settled by Kavad in Singara and were probably Kurds. They worshipped the martyr Abd al-Masih and at times revolted against the Sassanids, raiding Persian territory. Later, they joined forces with Arabs and Armenians to support the Sassanids in their wars against the Byzantines. These accounts illustrate the varied roles Kurdish groups played in the political and military landscape of late antiquity. From the period of the Islamic conquest until the 10th century, Kurdish groups played a relatively marginal role in regional politics. Sources from this era most often mention Kurds as mercenaries or rebels. Between roughly 950 and the 1050s, a phase referred to by scholars as the Kurdish interlude emerged, during which various Kurdish tribes gained control over large territories and established their own states. These Kurdish principalities relied primarily on Kurdish tribesmen and nomadic Kurds as the backbone of their military forces. During the 12th century, several Kurdish dynasties consolidated power in different regions. Among them was the Khazar-Ospid dynasty, which established its rule in southern Zagros and Luristan and expanded into territories such as Kugaluya, Khuzestan, and Golpayagan in the 13th century. In the 14th century, the dynasty further extended its control to include Shushtar and Basra. These developments reflect the growing territorial reach of Kurdish-led political entities during this period. It is noted in historical accounts that one of these dynasties might have been able to impose supremacy over the others and form a state encompassing the entire Kurdish region. This possibility, however, was disrupted by large-scale invasions of tribes originating from the steppes of Central Asia. After conquering Iran and asserting control over the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, the Seljuk Turks gradually annexed the Kurdish principalities. Around 1150, Ahmad Sanjar, the last of the major Seljuk rulers, reorganized these territories into a province named Kurdistan. This province had its capital at the village of Bahar near Hamadan and included the vilayets of Sinjar and Shahrazur west of the Zagros Mountains, as well as Hamadan, Dinawar, and Kermanshah to the east. A local civilization developed around the town of Dinawar, located northeast of Kermanshah, and later its influence was partially replaced by that of Sena, situated further north. One of the periods when Kurds reached a high point of political power occurred in the 12th century under Saladin, who belonged to the Rawadiya branch of the Hatabani tribe. Saladin founded the Ayyubid dynasty, under which several Kurdish chieftainships were established. The Ayyubid domains extended from Kurdish regions as far as Egypt and Yemen. During the Middle Ages, Kurdish quarters emerged in many cities outside Kurdistan as a result of the movement of Kurdish tribal forces and scholars. In these cities, Kurds established mosques, madrasas, and other buildings. From the 13th to the 19th century, Kurds established a number of independent states or principalities, including Ardalan, Badanan, Baban, Soran, Hakkari, and Bitlis. A detailed history of these states and their relations with neighboring powers is recorded in the Sharafnama, written in 1597 by Prince Sharaf al-Din Bitlisi. Among these principalities, Ardalan was particularly prominent. Established in the early 14th century, Ardalan controlled territories such as Zardiawa, Kanakin, Kirkuk, Kifri, and Haraman. Although Ardalan functioned as a vassal to successive Turkic federations centered in Persia, including the Karakoyunlu and Akkoyunlu, it maintained significant regional authority. The capital of Ardalan was initially located in Sharazor in Iraqi Kurdistan and was later moved to Sinna in present-day Iran. The Ardalan dynasty continued to rule the region as vassals under various sovereigns until its abolition by the Qajar monarch Nasir al-Din Shah in 1867. For many centuries, beginning in the early modern period, the Kurds came under the authority of two rival imperial powers in the Near East, the Sunni Ottoman Empire and the Shia Safavid Empire. This period began under Ismail I, Shah of Safavid Persia, whose rule extended over all regions inhabited by Kurds and far beyond. During his reign between 1506 and 1510, the Yazidis revolted against Ismail, who himself had Kurdish ancestry. Their leader, Shir Sarim, was defeated and captured in a violent confrontation in which several of Ismail's officers were killed. Following the suppression of the revolt, Kurdish prisoners were executed, with severe punishments. By the mid-17th century, Kurds living along the western borders of the Safavid Empire possessed firearms, although their use was limited. According to Tavernier, the mountain populations between Nineveh and Isfahan would trade only for gunpowder and bullets. Despite this access, firearms were not widely or consistently adopted among the Kurds, for reasons similar to those that limited their acceptance elsewhere in Iran. A Persian statistical survey of tribes from the early 18th century, during the reign of Shah Sultan Hussein, records that the Kurds of the Zafaranlo tribe refused to carry firearms, considering them unmanly. As a result, many Kurds continued to fight using lances and swords, while others relied on bows and arrows. Population displacement along the Safavid-Ottoman frontier was a key element of Safavid strategy. Hundreds of thousands of Kurds were removed from border regions in Kurdistan and the Caucasus and resettled in other parts of the Safavid Empire to serve defensive purposes. Similar population transfers affected other groups such as Armenians, Assyrians, Georgians, Circassians, and Turkomans, though often for different administrative or economic reasons. As the Ottomans advanced eastward, entire Kurdish regions in Anatolia were repeatedly subjected to destruction and forced deportation. These policies began during the reign of Shah Tahmasp I. Between 1534 and 1535, Tahmasp implemented a scorched earth policy against the Ottomans, ordering the systematic destruction of Kurdish towns and countryside. Crops and settlements were destroyed, and inhabitants were driven toward Azerbaijan and later relocated permanently to Khorasan, nearly 1,600 kilometers to the east. Shah Abbas inherited an empire threatened by the Ottomans in the west and the Uzbeks in the northeast. After securing temporary peace with the Ottomans, he focused on defeating the Uzbeks and then pursued a policy of selective depopulation in the Zagros and Caucasus regions. Kurds, Armenians, Georgians, North Caucasians, and others were deported from areas that might support an Ottoman campaign. Abbas encouraged Kurds to join the military by making service prestigious and financially attractive, raising an army of tens of thousands of predominantly Kurdish soldiers. At the same time, villages were destroyed, and populations were forcibly marched into the interior of Persia. Safavid court historians provide detailed descriptions of the scale of these policies. Iskandar Beg Munshi, writing in the Alam Ara-ye Abbasi, describes Shah Abbas ordering the devastation of regions north of the Araxes and west of Urmia, between Kars and Lake Van. Towns and countryside were laid waste, populations were rounded up, and resistance was met with massacres. Homes, churches, mosques, and crops were destroyed, and prisoners were forced southeast before Ottoman counterattacks could occur. Many deported Kurds were settled in Khorasan, while others were dispersed across the Alborz Mountains, central Persia, and even Balochistan. These deportations formed the basis of several Kurdish enclaves that exist today outside Kurdistan in Iran and Turkmenistan. On one occasion, Shah Abbas is said to have planned to deport 40,000 Kurds to northern Khorasan, but managed to relocate only 15,000 before his forces were defeated. Between 1609 and 1610, a prolonged conflict known as the Battle of Dimdim took place between Kurdish forces and the Safavid Empire. The battle centered on the fortress of Dimdim in the Baradost region near Lake Urmia. The fortress had been rebuilt by Emir Khan Lepsarin, ruler of Baradost, who sought to preserve the independence of his expanding principality against both Safavid and Ottoman influence. The reconstruction of Dimdim was viewed as a direct challenge to Safavid authority. Kurdish rulers, including those of Mukrian, rallied in support of Emir Khan. After a long siege led by the Safavid Grand Vizier Hatem Beg, lasting from November 1609 to the summer of 1610, the fortress was captured and all its defenders were killed. Shah Abbas then ordered a general massacre in Baradost and Mukrian and resettled the Afshar Turkic tribe in the area while deporting many Kurdish tribes to Khorasan. Persian historians portrayed the Battle of Dimdim as an act of rebellion or treachery, while Kurdish oral traditions, literary works, and historical narratives treated it as a struggle against foreign domination. In Kurdish tradition, Beyt-i Dimdim became a national epic, second only to Memuzin by Ahmad Khani. The earliest literary account of the battle was written by Fakih Tehran. The first sustained contact between the Ottomans and the Kurds occurred during the Ottoman-Safavid conflict in 1514 under the rule of Sultan Selim I. These early interactions were largely positive. Led by Idris Bitlisi, Kurdish forces sided with the Ottomans against the Safavids during the Battle of Shaldiran. Kurdish troops played a significant role in the Ottoman capture of Diyarbakir and other parts of eastern Anatolia from Safavid control. Within the Ottoman system, Kurds were commonly referred to as the Black Nation, while Turkomans were known as the Grey Nation. After securing control over eastern Anatolia, Selim I rewarded Kurdish allies with tax exemptions, military privileges when required, and a semi-autonomous status. This system of autonomy was administered by Kurdish tribal leaders and was hereditary, passing from father to son. The arrangement remained largely intact from 1514 until the mid-19th century. During this period, the majority of Kurds maintained loyalty to the Ottoman Empire, even as relations gradually became more strained in later decades. Tensions increased significantly after the Ottoman-Russian War of 1828 to 1829. The centralizing reforms of Sultan Mahmud II weakened Kurdish autonomy and disrupted established tribal structures. Kurdish tribes resisted these reforms, prompting Mahmud II to dispatch Rashid Pasha to suppress the uprisings. The Ottoman army, equipped with more modern weaponry and organization, defeated the Kurdish forces, who still relied on older Janissary-style methods. In 1834, fearing cooperation between the Sauran Emirate and Muhammad Ali Pasha of Egypt, the Ottomans sent an army against Sauran. Although initially repelled by Mir Kor, internal complaints from Kurdish notables led to Ottoman intervention, and Mir Kor was removed from power 2 years later. Following the Tanzimat reforms, Bedir Khan Beg, a former Ottoman ally, rebelled in response to increasing centralization and declared independence in 1847. During his rule, Bedir Khan Beg enforced strict Islamization policies and persecuted Yazidis and Assyrians. European powers pressured the Ottoman government to intervene, leading to a military campaign in which 12,000 Ottoman troops under Omar Pasha invaded Botan. Yazidis and Assyrians allied with the Ottomans against Bedir Khan Beg, who initially gained the upper hand but ultimately lost after one of his commanders defected. Bedir Khan Beg surrendered on the 4th of July 1847 in Era. After Bedir Khan Beg's defeat, most Kurdish regions came under direct Ottoman control. When Abdul Hamid II ascended the throne in 1876, relations between the Ottomans and the Kurds temporarily improved. Abdul Hamid II adopted a pan-Islamist approach rather than an Ottomanist one, which allowed several Kurdish religious leaders to rise in prominence, most notably Sheikh Ubaydullah. Sheikh Ubaydullah supported the Ottoman army during the Russo-Turkish War of 1877 to 1878, and later emerged as a central figure during a period of famine that severely affected eastern Anatolia. Sheikh Ubaydullah declared that Muslims would not permit the formation of an Armenian state and argued that the authority of the caliph had been weakened by the Tanzimat reforms. He estimated that Kurds in the Ottoman Empire numbered over 500,000 families. As conditions worsened following the war, Sheikh Ubaydullah led a revolt against the Ottomans while also fighting against the Russian Empire and Qajar Iran. After his defeat, he was taken to Istanbul, later escaped, and attempted another uprising before being captured again and exiled to Hejaz, where he remained until his death. Abdul Hamid II maintained policies that were perceived as favorable to the Kurds and earned the nickname Bave Kurdan, meaning father of the Kurds. In 1890, he established the Hamidiye cavalry, in which Kurds formed the majority of the troops. The The Hamidiye cavalry carried out attacks against Armenian populations during the Hamidian massacres and also targeted Assyrians during the Diyarbakir massacres of 1895. In the early 20th century, secular Turkish nationalism began to challenge Abdülhamid II's pan-Islamist policies. The Young Turk Revolution of July 1908 forced the restoration of the Ottoman constitution and parliament, ending Abdülhamid II's absolute rule. His reign formally ended on the 27th of April 1909. Pan-Islamism, which had sought to unite Muslims, including the predominantly Sunni Kurds, was replaced by nationalist and secular political currents within the empire. In 1916, during the First World War, the Ottoman government initiated the deportation of Kurdish populations. Talat Pasha stated that Kurdish tribal structures and leadership needed to be dismantled to prevent the continuation of Kurdish nationality in exile. Kurdish leaders were separated from their communities and sent to central Anatolian provinces, while women, children, the elderly, and the sick were settled in designated towns and dispersed among Turkish villages. Kurds were forcibly sedentarized, and large numbers were relocated from regions such as Bitlis, Erzurum, Palu, and Mush to Konya and Gaziantep. Many died from famine during the winter deportations. These policies continued even after the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire and the establishment of the Turkish Republic under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. After the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the partition of its territories by European powers, the Kurds were divided among the newly formed states of Turkey, French Syria, and British Iraq. A short-lived kingdom of Kurdistan, led by Mahmud Barzanji, emerged in opposition to British-imposed borders and existed from 1921 to 1925 before being incorporated into British Iraq. Kurdish nationalism began to take shape toward the end of the 19th century, emerging at roughly the same time that Turks and Arabs started to adopt ethnic forms of identity in place of earlier loyalties such as Ottoman citizenship or religious affiliation within the millet system. Although Kurdish revolts occurred intermittently during this period, it was not until the uprising led by Sheikh Ubaydullah in 1880 that explicit demands were made in the name of the Kurds as an ethnic group or nation. Ottoman Sultan Abdülhamid II responded to these developments through a policy of integration rather than outright repression. He sought to neutralize Kurdish opposition by co-opting influential Kurdish figures into positions of power within the Ottoman administration. This approach proved effective for a time, as demonstrated by the loyalty of the Kurdish Hamidiye regiments during the First World War. Following the First World War and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, Kurdish ethno-nationalism took on a more defined political character. This movement was largely reactionary, responding to major changes within the emerging Turkish Republic. These included radical secularization, which many religiously conservative Kurds opposed, increased centralization that threatened the authority of local Kurdish leaders, and the rise of Turkish nationalism, which posed the risk of political and cultural marginalization. During this period, Western powers, particularly the United Kingdom, made assurances that they would support Kurdish independence as part of their struggle against the Turks. These promises were later abandoned. One organization that played a central role in shaping Kurdish nationalist identity was the Kurdish Teli Semiyet, also known as the Society for the Rise of Kurdistan. Operating during the period of political liberalization known as the Second Constitutional Era from 1908 to 1920, the organization transformed growing interest in Kurdish language and culture into a political nationalist movement based on ethnic identity. After the First World War, the defeat and dissolution of the Ottoman Empire radically altered the political landscape of the Middle East. The Kurds, who had hoped that the post-war settlement would lead to the creation of an independent Kurdish state, instead found themselves divided among several new political entities. The Treaty of Sèvres, signed in 1920, contained provisions that allowed for the possibility of Kurdish autonomy and, under certain conditions, independence. These clauses raised expectations among Kurdish leaders and political organizations that an internationally recognized Kurdistan might emerge. These expectations were not fulfilled. The Turkish War of Independence, led by Mustafa Kemal, resulted in the rejection of the Treaty of Sèvres and its replacement by the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923. The new treaty made no reference to Kurdish autonomy or independence and formally recognized the borders of the Republic of Turkey. As a result, the Kurdish inhabited regions were permanently divided among Turkey, Iraq under British Mandate, Syria under French Mandate, and Iran. The international framework that had briefly acknowledged Kurdish political aspirations was effectively dismantled. In Turkey, the new Republican government pursued a policy of strong centralization and nation-building based on Turkish identity. Kurdish revolts broke out in response to these policies, most notably the Sheikh Said Rebellion of 1925. The uprising was suppressed by the Turkish military, followed by widespread arrests, executions, and deportations. The Turkish state implemented measures aimed at dismantling Kurdish social structures, including the abolition of traditional leadership roles and restrictions on the use of the Kurdish language. In Iraq, Kurdish regions came under British control following the establishment of the British Mandate of Mesopotamia. Kurdish leaders initially resisted incorporation into the new Iraqi state. Mahmud Barzanji declared himself King of Kurdistan and led several uprisings against British authority between 1919 and 1925. These revolts were ultimately suppressed, and the Kurdish areas were incorporated into the Kingdom of Iraq under British supervision. In Syria, Kurdish populations became part of the French Mandate. French authorities employed a policy of divide and rule, granting limited recognition to minority groups while preventing the emergence of unified nationalist movements. Kurdish political activity was closely monitored, and Kurdish regions were administered within the broader framework of the mandate system without any form of autonomous status. In Iran, Kurdish regions remained under the control of the central government. Although Iran had not been formally colonized, the post-war period saw increased efforts by the state to assert authority over peripheral regions. Kurdish leaders continued to negotiate, resist, or rebel in response to centralization policies, but no sustained autonomous Kurdish entity emerged during this period. During the Second World War, Kurdish regions were affected by the broader strategic interests of the Allied and Axis powers, particularly in Iran and Iraq. In Iran, the Anglo-Soviet invasion of 1941 weakened the authority of Reza Shah and created conditions that allowed various ethnic and political movements to re-emerge. The reduced control of the central government in the northwest opened political space for Kurdish activists and organizations to operate more openly than in previous years. In Iraqi Kurdistan, Kurdish political activity intensified during the war years. Mullah Mustafa Barzani emerged as a prominent leader after participating in earlier revolts against the Iraqi government. During the early 1940s, Barzani and his followers were involved in renewed armed resistance, taking advantage of wartime instability. These uprisings were eventually suppressed by the Iraqi state, forcing Barzani and his supporters to flee across the border into Iran. In Iranian Kurdistan, the collapse of centralized authority during the war enabled the formation of Kurdish political institutions. Kurdish intellectuals and leaders established organizations that promoted Kurdish language, culture, and political rights. With the presence of Soviet forces in northern Iran, Kurdish activists were able to organize with a degree of protection from Tehran's control. In 1946, these developments culminated in the establishment of the Republic of Mahabad in northwestern Iran. The republic was supported by the Soviet Union and led by Qazi Muhammad, with Mullah Mustafa Barzani serving as its military commander. The Mahabad Republic implemented Kurdish as the language of administration and education, and sought to create Kurdish political institutions. However, its survival depended heavily on continued Soviet backing. When Soviet forces withdrew from Iran later in 1946 under international pressure, the Iranian government moved quickly to reassert control over the region. The Republic of Mahabad collapsed within months. Qazi Muhammad and other leaders were arrested and executed, while Barzani and his forces once again fled, eventually crossing into the Soviet Union. The brief existence of the Mahabad Republic marked a significant moment in modern Kurdish political history, demonstrating both the possibilities and limitations of Kurdish self-rule in the mid-20th century. After the Second World War, Kurdish regions continued to be divided among several states, each pursuing its own policies toward Kurdish populations. In Iraq, Kurdish political movements gradually reorganized after the collapse of the Mahabad Republic. Mullah Mustafa Barzani returned from exile in the Soviet Union in 1958 following the overthrow of the Iraqi monarchy. The new Republican government initially recognized certain Kurdish rights, raising hopes for autonomy. These hopes soon faded as negotiations between Kurdish leaders and Baghdad broke down, leading to renewed armed conflict. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, fighting between Kurdish forces and the Iraqi government continued intermittently. In 1970, the Iraqi government announced an autonomy agreement, but its implementation was delayed and ultimately undermined by disputes over territory and political authority. The conflict escalated again after the Algiers Agreement of 1975 between Iraq and Iran, which ended Iranian support for Kurdish rebels and resulted in a major defeat for the Kurdish movement. Large numbers of Kurds were displaced, and Barzani died shortly thereafter. In Iran, Kurdish demands for autonomy resurfaced after the Iranian Revolution of 1979. Kurdish parties sought recognition of cultural and political rights within the new Islamic Republic. The central government rejected these demands, leading to armed clashes between Kurdish groups and Iranian security forces. Fighting continued into the 1980s as the state worked to reassert control over Kurdish regions. In Turkey, Kurdish identity remained heavily suppressed in the decades following the establishment of the republic. The use of the Kurdish language was restricted, and expressions of Kurdish ethnicity were officially denied. In the late 1970s, new forms of Kurdish political activism emerged, culminating in the formation of the Kurdistan Workers' Party (PKK) in 1978. The conflict between the PKK and the Turkish state escalated into a prolonged armed struggle beginning in the 1980s. In Syria, Kurdish political activity was tightly controlled after independence. Many Kurds were denied citizenship and cultural expression was restricted. Kurdish organizations operated clandestinely, and demands for recognition and rights were consistently rejected by the Syrian state. The late 20th century saw further upheaval in Iraqi Kurdistan. During the Iran-Iraq War, Kurdish areas were heavily affected by military campaigns. In the late 1980s, the Iraqi government carried out the Anfal campaign, which included mass killings, village destruction, and the use of chemical weapons against Kurdish civilians. After the 1991 Gulf War, a Western enforced no-fly zone allowed Kurdish forces to establish de facto autonomous administration in northern Iraq, laying the foundation for the Kurdistan regional government. The total Kurdish population is estimated to be between 30 and 45 million people, making the Kurds one of the largest ethnic groups in the world without a sovereign state. Kurds are primarily concentrated in a contiguous region commonly referred to as Kurdistan, which spans southeastern Turkey, northwestern Iran, northern Iraq, and northern Syria. Significant Kurdish diaspora communities also exist outside this region, particularly in Europe, the Caucasus, and Central Asia, as a result of labor migration, political exile, and historical population transfers. Turkey is home to the largest Kurdish population. Estimates of the number of Kurds in Turkey vary widely due to differences in census practices and political sensitivities, but figures generally range from 15 to 20 million. Kurds in Turkey are concentrated mainly in the southeastern provinces, though large Kurdish communities also reside in major cities such as Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir as a result of internal migration. In Iran, the Kurdish population is estimated at between 8 and 10 million. Iranian Kurds primarily inhabit the western provinces of Kurdistan, Kermanshah, and parts of West Azerbaijan and Elam. Smaller Kurdish communities are also found in northeastern Iran, particularly in Khorasan, where their presence reflects earlier forced resettlements carried out during the Safavid period. Iraq's Kurdish population is estimated at between 6 and 8 million. Most Iraqi Kurds live in the northern part of the country, where they form the majority population in the Kurdistan region. This region includes the provinces of Erbil, Suleymania, and Dohuk, as well as disputed territories such as Kirkuk. Since the early 1990s, Iraqi Kurds have exercised a significant degree of self-administration within this area. In Syria, the Kurdish population is estimated at between 2 and 3 million. Syrian Kurds are concentrated in the northern regions along the border with Turkey, including areas around Afrin, Kobani, and Qamishli. Prior to the Syrian civil war, many Kurds in Syria were stateless due to earlier citizenship policies. Outside the Middle East, Kurdish diaspora communities are found in substantial numbers in countries such as Germany, France, Sweden, and the Netherlands. Smaller Kurdish populations exist in the United States, Canada, Russia, Armenia, Georgia, and Central Asia. These communities have played an important role in preserving Kurdish cultural and political life beyond the Middle East.